May 14, 1945. Landsberg Prison, Bavaria. The war across Europe had ended 6 days prior. Everywhere else the world was exhaling. Paris danced. London wept with relief. New York drowned in confetti and strangers' embraces. Church bells that had been silent for years split the air again. None of that reached Landsberg. Landsberg had a cell. Stone walls, a narrow cot, a bucket shoved into the corner, and a man perched on the edge of that cot who would not see another sunset. SS Obersturmbannführer Heinrich Roth had led an Einsatzgruppen mobile killing unit across Eastern Europe. His men had swept through Poland and Ukraine the way a brush fire moves through dead timber. Villages erased, families erased, children erased. The tribunal spent 4 days wading through the evidence: survivor testimony, photographs, coordinates of mass graves, documents bearing Roth's own signature, authorizing executions in his own handwriting. Deliberation lasted under 2 hours. The verdict: death by hanging. 0600, May 15th. Roth absorbed the sentence without a flicker crossing his face. He had carried an SS rank since 1936. He had endured the Eastern Front. He had watched the Reich disintegrate around him piece by piece. By the time they pronounced the sentence, dying no longer frightened him. Being forgotten did. At the tribunal, he'd been granted a final statement. He spent it with precision. He rose, squared his shoulders, fixed his gaze on the American officers seated in judgment, and delivered words that climbed the chain of command within hours. Quote _0 _. The courtroom temperature dropped. The presiding officer commanded that the statement be struck from the official transcript. Guards hauled Roth out of the room. But the words were already loose. They had already found the one man incapable of letting them pass: General George S. Patton. And on the evening of May 14th, 1945, 6 hours before Roth was scheduled to hang, Patton's staff car rolled to a stop at Landsberg's gates. No one had summoned him. No one had requested his presence. No standing order put him there. He showed up on his own, and what unfolded inside that cell, the words Patton spoke to a condemned SS commander in his final living hours, would haunt every guard who stood witness for the rest of their natural lives. This is the account of what Patton said to the SS commander before the execution. Before going further, subscribe to this channel. These are the Second World War stories that textbooks leave out. The ones that force you to confront who these men actually were, what convictions drove them, and what price those convictions extracted. To grasp what transpired in that cell, you first need to understand the man sitting inside it. And you need to understand why Roth's statement landed on Patton like a personal insult. Heinrich Roth was not a fanatic in the conventional sense. He wasn't howling ideology on street corners in 1933. He wasn't a party true believer from the earliest days. He was something far more lethal than that. He was a man who had thought his way into conviction. Roth entered the world in 1908, in Dresden. His father carried decorations from the trenches of the First World War. His grandfather had served under Bismarck. In the Roth household, military duty wasn't merely a profession. It was the family's substitute for faith. When Roth enlisted in the SS in 1936, he wasn't fleeing deprivation or grasping for authority. Doors were open to him. He held a university degree in law. He had social connections. What he craved was devotion to something he deemed worthy of self-sacrifice. He located that purpose in the doctrine of racial war. By 1941, as Einsatzgruppen units trailed the Wehrmacht into Soviet territory, Roth had become a genuine convert, not to brutality as an end in itself, to a mission, a cause he had built an elaborate intellectual architecture to rationalize. He ran his unit with rigid discipline and meticulous bureaucratic order. Reports filed on schedule, numbers cataloged, authorization documents signed the way a bookkeeper initials ledger entries. The slaughter was methodical, structured, and, inside his own mind, indispensable. That is precisely what made him truly dangerous, and that is what made his tribunal statement so deeply destabilizing. Because Roth did not rise to defend mass murder. He rose to collapse the boundary between himself and every soldier who ever fought under a flag. It was a lie, but an exquisitely engineered one, and it demanded a response. Patton received the transcript of Roth's statement on the evening of May 13th. He read it once, set it down, picked it up, and read it a second time. His chief of staff, General Hobart Gay, was present in the room. Gay later recalled that Patton said nothing for nearly a full minute after finishing that second pass. That was strange. Patton had an immediate reaction to everything, always. When he finally opened his mouth, all he said was, "Where is he being held?" Gay answered, "Landsberg." Execution was set for the following morning. Patton folded the transcript, slipped it into his jacket pocket, and announced he was going. Gay attempted to talk him out of it. There was no military need. The trial had concluded. The verdict stood. Arriving at a prison to confront a condemned SS commander on the eve of his hanging, that was precisely the kind of act that invited scrutiny, invited questions nobody wanted asked. Patton heard the full argument through. Then he said, "He told that courtroom he was no different from us. I'm going to explain exactly how wrong he is, and I'm going to do it while he still has enough hours left to absorb what I'm saying." Gay dropped the objection. 40 minutes later, Patton's car cut through the Bavarian darkness toward Landsberg. That prison carried its own weight long before 1945. Adolf Hitler had served time there in 1924. He had written Mein Kampf in a cell on the upper floor. When American forces seized the facility in April of 1945, nobody missed the symbolism. Now its cells held SS officers, war criminals, men who had built entire careers on the ideology Hitler scratched into those pages. When Patton pulled up to the gates, the duty officer nearly lost his clipboard. No one had received word the general was coming. No preparations, no formal escort, no staff lined up. Patton walked in with 2 aides and a single MP, told the duty officer to bring him to Roth's cell, and instructed him to leave once the door swung open. The duty officer hesitated. Protocol demanded a guard present during any contact with condemned prisoners. Patton fixed him with that look, the one Patton reserved for things standing in his way. "You can wait outside the door. Now move." They moved. Roth was awake when the cell opened. He sat on the edge of his cot, still wearing his SS uniform. The tribunal had allowed it. His back was straight. Whatever Roth was, he would not spend his last hours collapsed against a wall. When he registered Patton, something flickered across his face. Not quite surprise. Something closer to calculation. Roth's mind operated that way. Even now, even here. He was reading the situation, gauging what this visit signified, what advantage it might still offer. Patton crossed the threshold. The door stayed open behind him. One aide stood at the frame. The duty officer positioned himself in the corridor, out of sight, close enough to hear every word. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Patton studied Roth the same way he had studied the bodies at Dachau 2 weeks prior. Cold, total attention. The kind of focus you bring to something you need to comprehend before you decide what to do with it. Roth met his gaze without wavering. He had stood under Soviet artillery at Kursk. He was not about to flinch before an American general in a prison cell. At last, Patton broke the silence. Roth offered nothing, still nothing, but Roth's jaw shifted. Barely perceptible. "I want to tell you why you're wrong. Not for your sake. You'll be dead in 6 hours. I want to say it aloud in this room because somebody should." What followed was not a speech. Patton never prepared remarks for moments like this. What emerged was direct, measured, and stripped bare of performance. The guards who later recounted it said, it sounded like a man settling an account, like someone completing a conversation that had been cut short years ago. He began with the word soldier. "You called yourself a soldier. I have spent 30 years learning what that word actually means. A soldier fights other soldiers. He takes ground, holds it, loses it. He faces an enemy carrying a weapon, an enemy with a real chance of killing him. That distinction is what separates the act of war from murder. The risk is shared. The danger runs both ways. Do you understand what I'm describing?" Roth answered then, for the first time. His English was precise. Accented. "I understand what you're describing. I disagree that it is the only definition. Patton nodded slowly, like a man hearing exactly what he expected to hear. I know you disagree. That's the problem. Because the definition you're operating from, the one that let you sign those documents and still sleep, requires the people on the other side to be something less than human. You had to believe that first. Everything else followed. He stepped closer, not a threat. A deliberation. The men I commanded, the ones who died in North Africa and Sicily and France, they understood the men across from them had mothers, had children, had something worth losing. They killed them anyway, because there was a war, and war demands that. But they never had to convince themselves those men weren't people. They never needed that lie to do what needed doing. Roth's expression shifted. The calculation drained out of it. Something harder settled in its place. Underscore, underscore, quote, underscore, 1, 2, underscore, underscore. Patton continued. Quote 13. A long silence. Roth finally spoke. Steady voice, but quieter than before. Quote 14. Quote 15. Patton said without hesitation. Quote 16. He didn't wait. Not because we were more ruthless. Not because we were willing to cross lines you wouldn't cross. We won because we were right about what a human being is. You built a war machine on the premise that entire categories of people were disposable. We built ours on the conviction that every single one of our men was worth bringing home breathing. I spent 4 years trying to win battles fast, not for glory, not for ground, because every extra day of fighting meant another 1,000 of my boys in the dirt. He stopped. Held Roth's